Experiential learning comes in many forms and is growing in popularity in our classrooms. This video examines how we can redesign the traditional delivery model of experiential learning in order to increase student success. Experiential learning comes in many forms, including hands-on laboratory work, performance-based instructions, apprenticeship placements, and field studies. While there is a wide diversity in forms of experiential learning, at the heart of this strategy is an attempt to mimic real-world learning, in which we learn by reflecting on our personal experiences and through experimentation when we respond to experiences and challenges. The push towards experiential learning is linked to its effectiveness in creating true proficiency over time, but experiential learning is time-consuming. Take driving. Most of us learn to drive from experience. Even those of us who take a course spend most of our time learning through repeated trial and error. This is why the Government of Ontario no longer allows drivers to gain a full license in only 1 year after having a learner's permit. Instead, there is now a graduated learning process that takes approximately 2 years in order to prevent the high rates of tragic accidents that were associated with young drivers when I was a teenager. By extending the learning period for a driver, Ontario has significantly increased road safety. Because experiential learning is so time-consuming, educators in content-intense courses do not have the ability to run a fully experiential learning model of education. So often, they use more passive strategies like reading, researching, and lecturing to target knowledge acquisition, and then they reinforce the learning through an active experiential strategy in which students apply their knowledge. However, while this approach is adequate for some, it does not support all learners. Passive teaching strategies often result in a greater number of disengaged learners. Also, since the knowledge acquisition is targeted without application, it becomes abstract and difficult to internalize for some learners, especially when the theoretical learning is heavy on terminology and the learner has weaker literacy skills. Consequently, when the learner gets to the active task, they can have insufficient skill to apply and the learning stalls. To prevent this from happening, it is better to synchronize the knowledge acquisition with the application so they are delivered as a guided experience. In a guided experience, the teacher guides and facilitates the learning process while the student executes the process. As the process unfolds, the student's learning grows, and the teacher then layers on theory by verbally deconstructing the process using technical terminology, Socratic questioning, and adding background explanations as needed. To illustrate how this is done, we will look at a sample lesson from the Grade 9 Ecology Unit. This lesson involves students designing and conducting an inquiry into the trends in biomes. However, the larger goal of the lesson was to teach students about the scientific method approach to experimentation. This inquiry was done using data accessed through the HHMI Biome Viewer app, which students had used in a previous lesson. Links to the video and files associated with the previous lesson are in the description below. In the lesson featured for this video, however, students were expected to develop a hypothesis about any two variables in a biome and to use the app to test their hypothesis. Please keep in mind that at the start of this lesson, most students did not know what the terms hypothesis or variables even meant, nor had they had any experience in designing and implementing an experiment in their elementary school. To start the process, students were asked to use the app to explore a location of their choice and to place a sticky note on a Jamboard for each piece of numeric data that they could find for their location. The image above shows a sampling of some of the data points that students could identify. After they had completed this task, we explored the term variables through a discussion on whether students expected these data values to be the same for all of their biomes or not, and why the values may vary. We also discussed the concept of qualitative versus quantitative observations by discussing observations about their biomes that might not be easily expressed as a number, but rather in a word form. Students were then asked to take 2 of the sticky notes from their collections that they thought would have a relationship, and to express this relationship by completing the above sentence. We frame this sentence as an opinion backed with a reason. To support students forming their own opinion, we use Socratic questioning and modeling. Every time a student formed their opinion, they shared it with the class. For students for whom modeling was insufficient, we used the Socratic questioning to help. For example, where do you think most mammals live and why? Once students had formed their opinions with a rationale, they were introduced to the terms hypothesis, independent variable, and dependent variable. They then color-coded their sentences for these terms. Finally, I modeled a hypothesis of my own, and the class and I discussed how I could use the app to test my hypothesis. They were then asked to collect the data to test their own hypotheses. At a later date, I modeled how to graph and analyze my data, and they followed my model to analyze their data. Finally, students reported their findings in a lab write-up supported by a template. Links to my files associated with this task are in the video description below. If you are a science teacher and this sample activity interests you, feel free to download them. And I would like to give a really heartfelt thank you to all the folks at HHMI Biointeractive for their amazing wealth of biology resources. If you are an educator and this subject matter interests you, please consider subscribing to this channel. I will do my best to make videos on educational topics at a reasonable pace. My sincere hope is that my videos are useful to others and help me to consolidate and reflect on my practice. And finally, if you are a classroom teacher, good luck to you on your journey. We are all in this together.